Welcome. Tonight, I'll share with you 3 terrifying tales from the depths of the forest. Stories whispered by those who've worked alone in remote watchtowers, surrounded only by trees and silence. I used to think the forest was peaceful. When I first took this job at Blackwater Ridge Lookout Tower, the isolation was exactly what I needed. 3 months away from civilization, 60 miles of wilderness in every direction, and nothing but the gentle hush of pine and fir to keep me company. The Forest Service manual called it an opportunity for introspection and solitude. After everything that happened back in the city, the breakdown, the hospital stay, the concerned looks from everyone who claimed to care, solitude felt like salvation. For the first 2 weeks, I relished the quiet. My daily routine became a meditation. Wake at dawn, check the surrounding peaks for smoke, take weather readings, radio in my morning report, maintain the tower and equipment. The rest of the time was mine to read, draw, or simply stare out at the endless sea of green. My tower, perched atop a granite outcropping at 7,500 feet, afforded me a 360-degree view of some of the most pristine wilderness in the country. At night, with no light pollution, the stars seemed close enough to touch. Then the footsteps began. The first time I heard them, I was halfway through a dog-eared copy of Thoreau, a soft, rhythmic crunch on the pine needle carpet that surrounds my tower. Too deliberate to be an animal, too measured to be falling branches. I set my book down and listened. The steps circled the base of my tower methodically, as if whatever was making them wanted me to hear. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed down the tower's metal staircase, the beam cutting through the darkness as I swung it in wide arcs around the clearing. Nothing, just the black wall of trees and the soft whisper of wind through branches. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin against the vastness of the woods. "Is someone there?" The forest answered with silence. I told myself it was a deer or maybe a fox. The isolation was playing tricks on my perception. I climbed back up, double-checked the locks on the hatches, and tried to return to my book. But my focus was gone, replaced by a nagging sensation of being watched. The next night, the footsteps returned. Same time, 11:17 p.m. according to my watch. Same methodical pace. Crunch, 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 pause. This time they continued for nearly 10 minutes. When I finally worked up the courage to investigate, flashlight gripped so tightly my knuckles turned white. Again, I found nothing. No tracks, no broken twigs, no sign that anything had been there at all. By the 3rd night, I was prepared. I'd set up my phone to record audio, hoping to capture evidence of whatever was stalking my tower. When the footsteps began, I sat perfectly still, watching the digital waveform spike with each sound. The recording worked. I could see it working. But when I played it back later, there was nothing but the ambient hum of the forest. "You're jumping at shadows," I told myself as I stared at the empty recording. "This is what happens when you spend too much time alone." But I wasn't alone, not anymore. After a week of nightly visits, I radioed my supervisor. "Hey Diane, is there anyone else assigned to patrol this region? Any rangers or conservation crews?" "Negative," she crackled back. "You're the only Forest Service personnel for 30 miles in any direction. What's up?" "Nothing," I lied. "Just thought I heard someone." There was a pause on the line. "You okay up there, Taylor? Your voice sounds strained." "I'm fine," I said too quickly. "Just not sleeping great." "That tower has a history of making people stir crazy," she said, concern evident even through the static. "The isolation gets to some folks. No shame in tapping out early if you need to." I almost considered it. But what would I tell them back home? That I'd failed again? That I couldn't handle being alone with my thoughts? Number, I needed this job, needed to prove I could do it. "I'm fine," I repeated. "Really." That night, the pattern changed. The footsteps didn't circle the tower, they climbed it. Each metallic clang on the staircase sent vibrations through the entire structure. I sat frozen in my bed, watching the hatch that led from the stairs into my living quarters, waiting for it to open. It never did. The steps reached the top and then, after a long pause, descended again. When morning came, I checked the stairs for muddy footprints or any sign of an intruder. Nothing. I began keeping a journal, documenting every occurrence in meticulous detail. Time, duration, pattern of movement. I drew diagrams of the tower and the surrounding area, marking where the sounds seemed to originate. When I looked at 2 weeks' worth of data, a pattern emerged that chilled me to my core. Whatever was visiting me was getting closer each night, spending more time, becoming bolder. I started taking photos of the clearing at random intervals, scanning them for any sign of movement among the trees. One evening, as the sun was setting and the forest was bathed in deep amber light, I captured something. In the shadows between 2 distant pines, a figure stood motionless. Not quite human in proportion, too tall and thin, its limbs at strange angles. When I zoomed in, the image became too pixelated to make out details, but I swore I could see eyes, too many eyes, reflecting the dying light. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the wall, a knife in one hand and my radio in the other. The footsteps came as usual, but this time, they were accompanied by something new. A soft, wet sound, like something being dragged across the ground, and then a scratch at my door. Not the metal hatch connected to the stairs, but the actual door to my quarters. Scratch, 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 pause, scratch, scratch, scratch. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice breaking. "What do you want?" The scratching stopped, replaced by silence so complete I could hear my own heart hammering in my chest. Then, just at the edge of hearing, a sound like whispering. Many voices speaking words I couldn't quite make out. A susurration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I should have radioed for help. I should have requested immediate evacuation. But some part of me, the part that had been fragile for so long, needed to know I wasn't imagining things. I needed proof that what was happening was real. The next day I set up crude alarms around the tower base, empty cans on fishing line that would rattle if disturbed. I placed flour on the stairs to capture footprints. I positioned my phone to record throughout the night. I was going to catch whatever or whoever was tormenting me. Sunset came and went. The darkness of the forest pressed against my windows like a living thing. I waited, every nerve ending raw with anticipation. 11:17 p.m. Nothing. 11:30 p.m. Nothing. Midnight. Nothing. For the first time in weeks, the night was silent. No footsteps, no scratching, no whispers. I began to wonder if my preparations had scared off my nocturnal visitor, or worse, if there had never been anything there at all. Sleep tugged at me, the adrenaline that had kept me alert for days finally ebbing away. I fought it as long as I could, but eventually, my eyes grew too heavy to keep open. I woke to darkness and the sensation of being watched. The air in the tower felt different, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. My phone showed 3:42 a.m. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with dawning horror that something was wrong with the room. The corners didn't meet at right angles anymore. The ceiling seemed higher than it should be. And the shadows were moving. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight. As my fingers closed around it, a sound broke the silence, the creak of weight shifting on floorboards coming from inside my quarters. I swept the beam across the room and froze. There, in the corner farthest from my bed, stood a figure, human in rough outline only, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an impossible angle. Its skin, if you could call it that, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, a darkness deeper than the night around it. Where its face should have been, there was only a suggestion of features, constantly shifting and rearranging, never settling into anything recognizable. The thing took a step toward me, its movement unnatural, jerky, like watching film footage with frames missing. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as it took another step and another, the floorboards groaning beneath its weight. Just before it reached the foot of my bed, it spoke. Not with a voice, but directly into my mind. The words weren't in any language I knew, yet somehow I understood their meaning perfectly. I've been watching you watch for fire. Now I'm watching you watch for me. I must have lost consciousness because the next thing I remember is sunlight streaming through the windows. I was still in my bed, covers pulled up to my chin as if I'd slept normally through the night. My phone, flashlight, and knife were all neatly arranged on the bedside table. The flower on the stairs was undisturbed. The can alarms hadn't been triggered. But my journal was open to a new page, one I didn't remember writing. On it, in my own handwriting but with subtle differences, the letters more angular, pressed harder into the paper, was a single sentence. The watcher has become the watched. That was 3 days ago. I haven't slept since then. I've radioed Diane multiple times, but the connection fails mid-conversation every time. My phone shows no service, which isn't unusual up here, but now even my emergency satellite communicator can't establish a connection. I'm trapped. The footsteps continue nightly, but they no longer circle the tower or climb the stairs. Now they pace directly overhead on the roof. Sometimes the entire structure shakes, as if something massive is pressing down from above, testing the strength of my refuge. Last night, I found myself standing at the tower door, hand on the latch, with no memory of how I got there. Some part of me, a part that doesn't feel entirely like me anymore, wants to go outside, to walk into the woods, to find whatever is out there. The rational part of me knows that's suicide, but that rational part grows weaker with each passing hour without sleep. The strangest thing is how the forest has changed. The trees seem closer than before, the spaces between them narrower. Sometimes in my peripheral vision, I catch glimpses of them moving, not swaying in the wind, but deliberately shifting position when I'm not looking directly at them. The wildlife has gone silent. No birds, no squirrels, not even insects. The forest holds its breath, waiting. I've started hearing my own voice whispering to me from the dark corners of the tower when I'm alone, which is always. It tells me things, terrible things, that I've always been here, that I'll never leave, that the tower and I are one and the same, and the thing that visits me nightly isn't coming for me. It is me, the true me, the me I've been running from. I don't know how much longer I can last. My food supplies are dwindling faster than they should be. The water from the tap runs clear, but tastes faintly of copper and something else, something earthier and more primal. Every time I look in the mirror, my reflection seems delayed by half a second, as if it's deciding whether to follow my movements. Tonight will be different. Tonight, when the footsteps come, I won't hide. I won't cower in my bed clutching a knife that I know will be useless. Tonight, I'm going to open the door. I'm going to step outside. I'm going to walk into the woods and find it before it finds me. Because I've realized something. I'm not afraid of what's out there anymore. I'm afraid of what's in here, inside my head, inside this tower that feels less like a shelter and more like a cage with each passing hour. If anyone finds this journal, know that I was here, that I existed, that for a time I watched over this forest. Now the forest watches me, and I think it's always been this way. The first week at Cedar Ridge Lookout was a symphony of wilderness sounds. Red-tailed hawks crying overhead, Douglas squirrels chittering as they raced up lodgepole pines, wind sighing through spruce needles, and Blackwater Creek's constant tumble over moss-slicked stones. Every morning, I'd sip coffee on the catwalk, tracking the sun's golden path across the valley, while chickadees performed acrobatics in nearby branches. I'd taken this job to escape, 3 months alone at 9,500 feet after my catastrophic breakdown. The wilderness doesn't ask about prescription bottles or restraining orders. It doesn't care about the things I said to Sarah that final night, when I became someone I didn't recognize. Day 8, I woke to wrongness. Something essential had vanished overnight. Standing on my observation deck, mug clutched in white-knuckled hands, I stared across miles of green canopy painted copper by dawn light. The forest was identical to yesterday, yet fundamentally altered. No birdsong, no insects, no rustling leaves. Complete, absolute silence. Not unusual, I reasoned. Animals have quiet days. I performed my duties, sweeping the horizon for smoke, logging weather data, equipment checks. But by noon, the silence had thickened like congealing blood. I couldn't hear the creek anymore, though I could see silver water flashing between trees. I radioed headquarters. Cedar Ridge to base receiving. Static crackled before Meredith's voice broke through. Base here. Go ahead, Cedar Ridge. Any unusual weather systems I should know about? It's unnaturally quiet today. A hesitation. Nothing on radar. Clear forecast. Another pause. You okay, James? It's only been a week. I forced a laugh. Just curious about the wildlife disappearing. Nature has rhythms, she said. Nothing to worry about. By sunset, the silence had become a physical presence, pressing against my eardrums until they ached. Even my footsteps on metal stairs sounded muffled, as if the air itself consumed sound. Sleep came in restless fragments, my subconscious straining for any noise beyond my own heartbeat. Morning brought the same oppressive stillness. I made breakfast mechanically, the scrape of my fork against the plate unnaturally loud, before vanishing into the void. During check-in, Meredith's voice sounded distant, underwater. I had to see the creek up close. Protocol forgotten, I descended the tower and followed the winding trail through dense pines. The forest felt wrong, more like walking through a diorama than living woods. No branches swayed, no pine cones or fallen needles crunched underfoot. The air hung lifeless, carries neither scent nor sound. At the creek, horror seized me. The water flowed as it should, bubbling over stones, creating small waterfalls between pools, all in complete silence. I plunged my hand into the icy current. It felt wet, cold, real. But when I lifted my dripping fingers, The droplets fell back without a sound, like watching television with the volume at zero. Panic propelled me up the tower steps, taking them 3 at a time. I grabbed the radio with trembling hands. Cedar Ridge to base, emergency. Nothing but fractured static. Meredith? Anyone there? A voice cut through briefly. Can't signal. Then silence. I spent hours scanning the forest through precision binoculars, searching for any movement. The pines stood impossibly still, not a needle shifting despite what the anemometer told me was a 12-mile-per-hour wind. Even shadows seemed wrong, too sharp, too dark, as if painted rather than cast. That night, desperate for sound, I played music from my phone. The notes fell flat and lifeless, absorbed by the silence rather than breaking it. I screamed until my throat burned, but my voice sounded distant and weak, like someone else was screaming far away. On the 3rd day, I noticed something that froze my blood. The forest had changed. A lightning-struck pine I used as a landmark had shifted position. Rock formations stood at different angles. The distance to the creek seemed shorter. The forest was rearranging itself when I wasn't looking. I photographed my surroundings obsessively, comparing new images with old. The differences were subtle but undeniable. The landscape was transforming, inch by inch, closing in around my tower like a noose. That night, determined to catch these changes, I fought sleep. The full moon illuminated the clearing around my tower in cold silver light. Nothing moved, but I could feel the forest watching me, waiting. I jolted awake at dawn. The tree line had advanced overnight, at least 30 feet closer than before. Branches stretched toward my tower like grasping fingers. My hands shook as I called for evacuation, claiming medical emergency. Only static answered. My satellite phone showed no signal. My emergency beacon wouldn't activate. As the day progressed, the forest crept closer whenever my attention wavered. By sunset, pines pressed against the structure, their branches scratching against windows like fingernails on glass. The clearing had vanished entirely. Cedar Ridge Lookout was being swallowed alive. In desperation, I packed essentials for a forced hike out. But morning revealed no path. The trees had formed an impenetrable living barrier around the tower. Their trunks grew so densely packed that not even sunlight penetrated between them. Days blurred in the silence. I rationed food, knowing the scheduled supply drop would never arrive. The radio remained dead. I stopped looking outside, unable to bear the sight of branch tips probing window seams, searching for weaknesses. I began hallucinating, or thought they were hallucinations, whispers at perception's edge, shadows that moved independently, the constant sensation of being watched not by something alive, but by the forest itself. One night, half mad from isolation and silence, a terrible thought occurred. What if the forest had always been this way? What if the sounds I'd heard that first week, the birds, the wind, the creek, had never existed? What if my mind had manufactured what it expected to hear? I pored over my observation logs from those early days. The handwriting was mine, describing nature's chorus in meticulous detail, but the words seemed foreign now, written by someone else. Someone sane. On what I calculated to be day 20 of silence, I woke to find pine needles covering my floor, drifting down from hairline fractures in the ceiling. Looking up, I saw branches pushing through, reaching down like skeletal hands. The walls groaned as trees pressed against them from all sides. Wood splintered, glass cracked. The forest was coming inside. I retreated to the farthest corner, wrapped in thermal blankets as the temperature plummeted. The tower, my shelter, my prison, was being reclaimed by the wilderness. As the structure creaked and moaned around me, a chilling realization dawned. What if I was never meant to be here? What if I was the intruder and the forest was simply correcting an unnatural presence? I struggled to remember how I'd gotten this job, how I'd arrived. The memories felt thin, transparent, a story told rather than lived experience. Had there ever been a Meredith? Had I ever spoken to another human being from this place? When I opened my eyes again, the room had transformed. The walls stood farther away, the ceiling higher. My furniture had vanished. Beneath me was no longer wooden flooring but soil, soft with decades of fallen needles. I was sitting in a small clearing, encircled by ancient pines. Where my tower had stood was undisturbed forest, as if the structure had never existed. In the distance, visible through trees, stood another fire lookout on a ridge, Cedar Ridge Lookout. But I was somehow outside it now, in the forest that had consumed me. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't move. Looking down, I saw roots growing up around my ankles, binding me in place. They climbed higher, weaving through my clothes, into my flesh, not violently, but with patient purpose. I should have been terrified, yet a strange calm washed over me. The silence no longer felt threatening but right, natural. The forest wasn't killing me, but incorporating me, making me part of its eternal stillness. I had come seeking escape from what I'd become. The forest had given me what I wanted: permanence, belonging, absolution. The roots reached my neck, cool against feverish skin. I didn't fight as they covered my mouth, my nose, my eyes. The last thing I saw was the distant tower standing empty, like a photograph of something that never existed. Sometimes hikers report strange sounds near Cedar Ridge. Not birds or wind, but something almost human, almost forming words. They say if you listen closely, you might hear it asking, "Was there ever really a tower? Was there ever really a man inside it? Or has the forest always been this way? Silent, watchful, hungry." And if you find yourself on these trails when the birds suddenly fall quiet and your footsteps make no sound against the pine needle floor, turn back. Don't look behind you, just run. Because the silence is spreading and it's been waiting for you for a very long time. Eagle's Nest Fire Tower perches 90 feet above the wilderness, a solitary outpost on the edge of the Black Ridge National Forest. Through wraparound windows, I survey a sea of pine that stretches to the horizon, broken only by jagged mountain ridges. No roads visible, no cell service, just me, James Harmon, alone with the breathing forest for the 4-month fire season. I volunteered for this post, leapt at it actually. Most people can't handle the isolation, but after what happened with the department, I needed to disappear. The whispers in hallways, sidelong glances, and administrative review had become unbearable. Out here, 300 miles from the nearest city, I could finally escape the rumors and reconstruct myself in solitude. My 14 by 14 foot cabin contains the essentials: narrow cot, propane stove, weather instruments, high-powered binoculars, and state-of-the-art communications equipment that connects me to headquarters twice daily. The Forest Service has modernized over the decades. Solar panels power my laptop and emergency beacon, but they've kept some traditions. The ancient logbook chronicles every watchman's tenure since 1932. The pages stiff with age and occasional water damage. The first week passed in comfortable routine. Wake at dawn, perform weather readings, scan for smoke, maintain equipment, report in at scheduled intervals. Between duties, I read paperbacks left by previous watchmen and made entries in my personal journal, careful to document my observations with scientific precision. Old habits die hard. On my 9th night, I began to notice something odd. Each morning, small items were not where I had left them. My coffee mug moved from the counter to the desk. My compass turned to face east instead of north. My boots, which I always left by the door, placed nearly together beneath my cot. I dismissed it initially as my mind playing tricks, a combination of isolation and sleep disrupted by summer thunderstorms. I've never been superstitious until I checked the logbook. Flipping through entries from previous seasons, I noticed a pattern. Every watchman for the past 6 years had documented strange occurrences beginning around day 10 of their stay. Objects moving, unexplained sounds, the feeling of being watched. Most dismissed these events as wildlife or weather. Raccoons infiltrating through loose boards, wind creating pressure changes that shifted lightweight objects. Reasonable explanations. Then I found the entry from Watchman Thomas Garvey, dated August 17, 2019. Something is in the tower with me at night. I've begun setting traps, hair across doorways, talcum powder on the floor. Each morning the hairs are broken, the powder disturbed by footprints too small to be mine. Whatever it is, it's careful, methodical, and I believe it's becoming bolder. Last night I woke to find it standing at the foot of my cot, a darker shadow against darkness. When I switched on my flashlight, nothing was there. Garvey's entries continued for another week before abruptly ending mid-sentence. The next entry came from a Forest Service administrator noting Garvey had abandoned his post without notice, his personal belongings left behind. I should have been unsettled, but instead found myself intrigued. As a former psychology professor specializing in isolation phenomena, I'd studied how the solitary mind manufactures experiences to compensate for sensory deprivation. This presented a unique opportunity for self-experimentation. That night, I meticulously arranged my living space, photographing each area with my phone before sleep. I scattered talcum powder near the entrances and balanced pencils against the door and hatch leading to the observation deck. Morning revealed the pencils still in place, but the powder showed disturbances, not footprints exactly, but irregular swirls as if something had carefully attempted to smooth it out. Most disturbing of all, my photos showed subtle changes. A book rotated 90 degrees, my jacket hung on the wrong hook, my toothbrush moved from cup to counter. I reported nothing of this during my morning check-in. Henderson at dispatch already viewed the tower assignment as psychological torture, and I had no interest in validating his concern or giving him reason to send someone to check on me. I decided to extend my experiment. That evening, I placed a voice-activated recorder on my desk before settling into my cot. I kept my flashlight within reach, determined to catch my nocturnal visitor, whether it be animal, hallucination, or something else entirely. The recording captured nothing unusual until 3:17 a.m., when a subtle change in ambient sound occurred, the background hiss diminishing as if something was absorbing the ordinary night sounds. Then came a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice was neither male nor female, but dry and rasping, like autumn leaves scraping stone. I reviewed the recording 17 times, analyzing it from every angle. The rational part of my brain searched for explanations. Radio interference, building sounds distorted by wind, a half-dream incorporated into memory, but the precision of the words remained undeniable. That night, I left a note on my desk before pretending to sleep. "Who are you?" Morning revealed my note replaced with a response in handwriting that mimicked mine with unsettling accuracy. The Watcher before the Watcher. I photographed the note, then burned it in my stove. During my check-in, I casually inquired about the tower's history, framing it as interest in my temporary home. Henderson was evasive, mentioning only that it was a standard design from the 1930s conservation program, though the granite outcrop it stood on was called Watching Rock by indigenous tribes, supposedly a place where the barrier between worlds thinned. When pressed about unusual incidents, Henderson grew uncomfortable. He acknowledged a higher turnover rate for Eagle's Nest, but deflected further questions. Before ending the transmission abruptly, he mentioned that every lookout gets squirrely after weeks of isolation. That afternoon, I combed through the logbook more carefully, noting each unexplained resignation, each increasingly paranoid entry before a watchman's abrupt departure. The pattern was unmistakable. As daylight faded, my scientific detachment began to waver. The tower, which had felt peaceful just days earlier, now seemed to compress around me, the wooden walls absorbing sound in unnatural ways. The forest beyond my windows had darkened from vibrant green to impenetrable black, occasional lightning flickering in distant clouds like alien signals. I forced myself to continue the experiment. On a fresh page of the logbook I wrote, Day 11. I am aware of the presence sharing this tower. I propose communication rather than the mutual pretense of ignorance. What purpose does your observation serve? I positioned my phone to record time-lapse video of the logbook, then retreated to my cot, pretending to sleep while watching through barely opened eyes. The video later showed nothing approaching the book. Yet when I checked at dawn, a response had appeared, written in the same careful imitation of my handwriting. I observe the observers. I watch the watchers. I record what they become in the watching. Below these words was a detailed sketch of my sleeping face, rendered with disturbing precision. My features captured in an expression I'd never seen in any mirror. Vulnerable, open, unguarded. That day, scanning the forest with binoculars, I noticed something I'd overlooked during my previous surveys. In the distance, perhaps 8 miles northwest, stood another fire tower, partially obscured by ridgelines and tall pines. It appeared abandoned, its windows dark, structure listing slightly. According to my maps and briefing materials, no second tower existed in this region. During my evening check-in, I asked Henderson about it. His extended silence confirmed my suspicions before he reluctantly admitted the truth. The tower was decommissioned in 1976 after an incident where a watchman had gone insane and killed 2 rangers, claiming they weren't human. Henderson's voice dropped to a whisper as he advised me to check the back page of the logbook before abruptly ending our communication. The final page had been glued to the back cover, nearly invisible unless specifically sought. I carefully peeled it free. It contained a single paragraph in faded blue ink. For the watcher who sees the other tower, they are not separate structures. They are the same tower viewed from different times. What you observe watching you is yourself, changed by isolation and acceptance. When you can no longer distinguish between observer and observed, the barrier dissolves completely. Make your choice before the watching consumes you. It was signed by Henderson, dated 30 years earlier. That night, I left the tower door open and the trap door to the observation deck unlatched. I placed no powder, balanced no pencils. Instead, I waited in the darkness, eyes wide open. At 3:17 a.m., I heard the distinctive creak of weight on the observation deck ladder, followed by footsteps crossing to my cot. A figure stood at the foot of my bed, humanoid but wrong in subtle ways, its proportions slightly distorted as if viewed through warped glass. I could not make out its face, but somehow knew it wore my features, arranged in an expression I would never naturally form. The figure spoke in my voice, explaining the nature of our exchange. Someone must always watch the forest. Someone must always record. The tower demands it. As it spoke, I noticed the walls around us had become transparent, revealing not forest, but a vast empty darkness punctuated by distant lights that were not stars. The space between here and there seemed paper thin. The previous watchmen hadn't left. They had chosen differently, attempting to flee. The forest had reclaimed them. Henderson had understood. Henderson had accepted. Henderson watched from the other tower now. The figure moved closer, its outline blurring into the darkness surrounding my cot. The choice was simple: become the watcher or become the forest. In that moment of perfect clarity, I understood what had happened to all the others whose entries ended mid-thought. They had resisted. They had run. They had failed to understand the fundamental truth of Eagle's Nest. It was not merely a place for watching the forest. It was where the forest watched back. The figure extended what might have been a hand. I reached out. Morning found me alone in the tower, the logbook open to a fresh page. I made my entry with scientific precision, recording temperature, wind speed, barometric pressure. Through the windows, the forest spread before me, vibrant, alive, breathing with ancient patience. I could see each individual tree now, sense each rustle of wildlife beneath the canopy. During check-in, a new voice responded, young, slightly nervous. The dispatcher questioned the identity of the person responding from Eagle's Nest when their records showed James Harmon assigned to that post. I identified myself as Henderson, explaining that Harmon had left the previous day. The confused dispatcher was told to check the logbook when they sent someone up, as everything was documented properly. After signing off, I returned to my observation. From my vantage point, I could just make out the other tower in the distance, identical to mine but somehow wrong in subtle ways, like an image in a warped mirror. Through its windows, a solitary figure moved about, performing the familiar routines of watching. I raised my binoculars to get a better look at my counterpart, curious what face James Harmon wore now in his new role as the watched. The figure in the distant tower raised binoculars at precisely the same moment. Our gazes met across impossible distance, and we both smiled. Thank you for keeping watch with me tonight. If you enjoyed these stories and want more like them, feel free to subscribe and leave a like. It helps more than you know. Sleep well, and stay safe out there in the dark.